The cabin stood deep in the pines, far from the road, far from the kind of men who asked questions that left bruises behind. Smoke curled from the chimney in a thin, steady line, the sign of someone who knew how to keep a fire alive through long winters. The lumberjack saw her at the edge of the clearing just before dusk. She was standing there like she might disappear if she breathed too loudly, a sack slung over one shoulder, mud on her hem. One hand braced protectively against her belly, already round enough to tell a story no one had bothered to hear. He didn't reach for his axe, didn't shout. He set the log he was splitting aside and waited. "You lost?" he asked. She shook her head, then nodded, then whispered, "I was told you might help." That was how it began. He brought her inside without asking where she came from, poured soup, set bread on the table. He noticed the way she flinched when he moved too fast, the way she watched the door like it might open on its own and swallow her back into the dark. "My brother sold me," she said eventually, staring into the bowl. "Said I was trouble, said the child wasn't worth the shame." The lumberjack's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "You're safe here." She didn't believe him, not yet. The nights were hardest. She woke crying, sometimes shouting names he'd never heard. He'd sit by the stove until her breathing slowed again, keeping the fire fed, keeping the world outside at bay. Days passed, then weeks. Her strength returned in small ways. She swept the cabin, learned which herbs grew by the stream, talked to the baby softly when she thought no one was listening. He built a cradle from scrap pine, smoothing the edges with care he hadn't used on anything in years. "You don't have to," she said, watching him work. "I know," he replied. Winter came early. Snow pressed against the windows. One night her labor began with a cry that cut through the storm. He ran for the midwife who lived a mile away, carrying her through drifts that reached his knees. By dawn the child arrived, small, loud, alive. When the midwife left, the girl lay exhausted, tears slipping down her temples as the baby slept against her chest. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. The lumberjack stood awkwardly near the door, then stepped closer. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll learn." The baby grew, the cabin changed. Laughter joined the crackle of the fire, toys appeared. So did neighbors, careful at first, then kinder. One afternoon a man rode up to the clearing. He had the same eyes as the girl, the same mouth. "Her brother." He spoke of forgiveness, of regret, of taking her back. The lumberjack didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped between them. "She's not for sale," he said, "and she's not alone." The brother looked at the child playing on the floor, at the girl standing taller than she ever had before, and left without another word. That night she sat beside the lumberjack on the porch, baby asleep in her arms. "I thought family was something you were born into," she said, "or traded away." He shook his head. "Family is what stays." Years later, people would talk about the lonely lumberjack who took in a pregnant girl. They'd say he saved her. But those who truly knew the woods understood the truth. She gave him a reason to come home. The child gave him a future, and together they built something stronger than blood. A family that chose each other every single day. Spring returned slowly to the forest, like someone testing whether it was safe to hope again. The girl, Elena, stood at the edge of the stream one morning, the baby balanced on her hip, watching sunlight break through the trees. She realized she no longer counted the days by fear. She counted them by milestones. The baby's first laugh, the first time he reached for the lumberjack's beard, the first night she slept without waking in a panic. The lumberjack noticed the change before she did. "You hum now," he said one evening as she stirred stew over the fire. She paused, embarrassed. "I didn't know." "It's a good sound," he said. The child, Caleb, grew sturdy and curious. He followed the lumberjack everywhere, small boots crunching through pine needles, wide eyes watching every swing of the axe. Strong arms come from patience, the lumberjack told him once, guiding the boy's tiny hands as he stacked kindling. Not anger. Elena heard that and looked away, blinking hard. One afternoon, as the trees swayed in a warm wind, Elena finally told the rest of her story. How her brother had taken payment from a man twice her age. How she had run. How the road had felt endless and cruel. "I thought I was ruined," she said quietly, "like no place would ever take me." The lumberjack fed another log into the fire. "The forest takes what's broken and teaches it how to grow again," he said. "People should learn from that." Trouble came, as it always does, disguised as normalcy. A letter arrived from town, papers, questions about guardianship, about ownership, about whether the child belonged somewhere else. Elena's hand shook as she read. "They're saying I can't raise him alone," she whispered. "They say I need a husband or family." The lumberjack was silent for a long time. Then he said, "They're right about one thing." Her heart sank. "You don't raise him alone," he finished. "You never have." He walked with her into town the next day, not behind her, not ahead of her, beside her. When the officials asked who he was, he answered simply, "I'm home." The papers were signed, the questions stopped. That night, Elena stood on the porch with him, fireflies flickering between the trees. "I don't know what to call this," she said, "us." He looked at Caleb asleep in her arms, at the light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Call it staying," he said, "call it choosing." Years later, Caleb would tell people he grew up in the woods with a man who taught him strength and a woman who taught him kindness. And when people asked if the lumberjack was his real father, Caleb would grin and say, "He's the one who never left." And in a cabin built from rough pine and quiet mercy, 3 lives proved something the world often forgets. Family isn't who claims you. It's who protects you when no one else does. Time did what it always does in the woods. It softened the sharp edges. Caleb grew into his questions first. Why trees fell, why some winters were crueler than others, why people hurt the ones they were meant to protect. The lumberjack answered what he could and showed the rest with his hands, steady, patient, honest. Elena watched from the doorway, realizing that safety wasn't loud. It was consistent. One late autumn afternoon, a stranger appeared on the path, breathless and pale. He carried news from town, of a sickness spreading, of families struggling, of children left without anyone to claim them. Elena felt the old fear stir, the instinct to shrink. The lumberjack didn't hesitate. They opened the cabin. Not all at once, not recklessly, one family at a time, a night's rest, a warm meal, directions, sometimes more. The cabin learned new sounds, extra boots by the door, whispered gratitude, the soft crying that comes before relief. Elena found herself teaching again, not lessons from books, but from living, how to cook when supplies were thin, how to calm a frightened child, how to stand your ground without raising your voice. She discovered that what had been taken from her had not taken everything. One winter evening, as snow fell thick and quiet, Caleb asked a question he'd been carrying for a while. "Do I have to leave someday?" he asked, staring into the fire. Elena's breath caught. The lumberjack answered first. "Everyone chooses their own path," he said gently, "but no matter where you go, this place stays yours." Caleb nodded, satisfied. He leaned back against the man's knee and fell asleep. Years later, when Caleb did leave, tall, kind, and sure of himself, he carried the woods with him. He wrote often. He came back when he could. He brought people who needed to remember what staying felt like. And the cabin remained. Not famous, not perfect, just open. If you asked Elena what the lumberjack had found when he took her in, she would smile and say it wasn't more mouths to feed or trouble to manage. It was a life that finally knew how to hold another without breaking. And if you asked the lumberjack what he'd gained, he'd look toward the trees, where laughter sometimes echoed even years later, and answer the same way he always did. Home. Seasons layered themselves over the cabin like rings inside a tree. Alina's hair silvered early, not from age, but from a life that had learned too much too soon and then finally learned how to rest. The lumberjack's shoulders bent a little, though his hand stayed steady. The forest noticed and adjusted, paths worn smoother, work taken slower, silences deepened rather than emptied. One spring, Caleb returned with a woman at his side and a nervous hope in his eyes. "She lost her place," he said simply. "I told her about ours." Alina didn't ask questions. She set another plate on the table. The lumberjack added another log to the fire. That was how it always happened. The cabin became a hinge in the world, a place where lives swung from breaking to becoming. Some stayed a night, some a season. A few stayed long enough to put down roots and leave something behind. A bench by the stream, a repaired roof, a story told softly by the fire. Once, many years after that first winter, a man arrived who knew Alina's brother. He carried apologies like heavy luggage and spoke of regret as if it were currency. Alina listened. Then she said calmly, "I forgave myself, that was the work." The man left lighter than he arrived, though not absolved. The forest didn't judge, it simply watched him go. On a clear evening, when the sky was wide and forgiving, Alina and the lumberjack sat on the porch wrapped in shared quiet. "Do you ever think about how close we came to not meeting?" she asked. He nodded. "Every day." And then I cut another log," he said, a faint smile in his voice, "and make sure the fire stays." When he passed, it was as gently as a leaf letting go. Alina held his hand until it cooled, whispering gratitude into the space he left behind. The forest mourned in its own way, wind through branches, birds quiet for a day. People came, they brought food, they brought stories, they brought the proof of a life that had mattered without needing to be loud. Alina stayed. She kept the cabin open. Children grew up knowing there was a place where you could arrive without explanation, where you could be fed before you were asked anything, where you could sleep without bracing for the night. When Alina finally joined him years later, they buried her beside the trees, near the stream where sunlight always found its way through. Caleb stood there with his own children, telling them, "This is where staying was taught." And long after names faded, the cabin remained, a quiet truth written in wood and firelight. Some families are not born. They are built, by choosing again and again to open the door.